All right, let's go ahead and get started. I assume you guys can hear me okay. All right, I got my thumbs up from my guys on the team who are here to watch the talk as well. Hopefully all of you are doing well, had a good lunch, and is ready to hear about how to build great gallery-style apps. It's funny, we always find this talk time an interesting time. There's a great debate on whether 9 a.m. the second day is the toughest time to get people's attention because everyone's hungover, or 1 p.m. because you're partially hungover and full. So we've got a lot of exciting content. Hopefully it's really going to show you how to build great gallery experiences into your app. My name is Ed Averitt. I'm a lead program manager at Microsoft. My team primarily owns the search stack and experience, and that includes some things like content search, the property system, and the thumbnail cache. Now, an interesting question to ask why a search guy is giving this talk. We're going to reiterate that a lot through the talk about how we've made it so easy and so approachable for anyone to build a gallery-style experience. So first and most important question, what is a gallery experience? A gallery experience is all about a collection of items, of files that you really care about. Historically, it's been music and pictures, but as we see content growing and growing, this is surely going to expand. Video is growing by leaps and by bounds with DSLRs and cameras, and we're just seeing more and more content that users own and create. Now, a quick visual walkthrough, probably the most canonical gallery experience app in the world is Windows Media Player. But all gallery experiences have a few common things that they do. First, they have a rich thumbnail representation along with properties. This really helps you digest the information that you're about to launch and play and work with. Second, it provides rich pivots over that data. So you can see by album, by genre, by people, by date taken, things like that that make it really easy to get to your experience. Now, if you look at Windows Media Player as an example, this was an extremely complex piece of code. And one of the things we said with building Metro-style apps is we want to bring great gallery experiences to the masses. We want to make this so approachable that any developer at any level and any language can put a great gallery experience. And what you have is an evolution of a desktop app like this to a Metro-style app like this, which is the music player you've seen in some of the keynotes and is also being demoed down in the exhibition hall. And you see the same core traits, but designed in Metro style. Rich thumbnail views and properties, great ways to pivot. And this is music. You see the same things in videos. With rich thumbnails, great ways to pivot on this data to make it very useful. Now, not every app needs a great gallery experience. Gallery experiences are all about when your app needs to deal with literally hundreds to thousands of files. There's a lot of apps out there that just need to use a single file, and we built a lot into the OS to make sure you get a great experience if you're just working on that. So I've seen a lot of Samsung prototype devices out there. If you pull up the Measured app, that's exactly what this is. And this is an app that really just works with a single file. And on the left side, if you see the insert photo, you call that, and this calls the file picker. Now, if you've been in Manav Mishra's talk or David Field's talk talking about the file system, this is a way for an app that just works over a single file to get a great gallery experience for picking items. And you have rich thumbnails, and you have pivots. Now, if this is the type of app you're thinking about building, this probably isn't the most interesting talk for you. If you hadn't seen David Field's talks or Manav Mishra's, I really recommend going back and watching it, and it'll show you how easy it is to pull in this experience. This talk is talking about how you actually pull an experience like this directly into your app. Now, there's 3 core things we're going to cover in this talk today. First, what are the features, and I've covered a few of those. Then getting started with the API set, and then finally building the Metro style with a minimum amount of code. And I really do mean minimum. A huge emphasis this time was put on making this so approachable, so easy for anyone to develop on. You're going to walk out of here being able to build a great gallery experience over any set of local files. So there are 5 core features of gallery experiences when you break them down. The first is views, and this is all about sorting, grouping, and mass editing. And you saw that earlier. It's this rich display with literally thousands of files. The second part, which feeds into that view, is rich thumbnails and property display. And more with Metro Style, you saw in Jensen's talk and numerous other talks, it's all about getting the content right per your media type. So we spent a lot of time making it really easy to nail music, to nail videos, to nail pictures, to get a great display for that you can leverage and extend beyond what the system provides. The next one is fast scrolling. And this is one that's occupied the majority of coding when you build a gallery experience. This is so when I have 10,000 music files or I have 100,000 pictures, I can pick up the scroll bar or I can swipe, and the view feels instantly reactive. This actually requires a lot of hard work, but again, something we built into the system through a few key components that you don't have to worry about anymore. The next is mirroring, and this is showing an up-to-date view of the file system. This has always been, since these are local files, apps need to look at what's in a given library, be it music or pictures, and go ahead and replicate that. That is very, very easy in this new system. There's almost nothing an app needs to do to pull off mirroring the file system. And the last piece is search. I'm not going to talk a ton about search, because hopefully a lot of you attended Priya V's talk earlier this morning. She's actually right out there in the audience. She gave a great set of demos and sample code of building search in. I'll touch it a little, but search and gallery views always go hand in hand. Very, very easy to build in. So when we think about building your gallery experience, there's 3 core technology components that you need to think about. First, there is the File API. And this is all about enumerating files using queries. Now, this is a little different than historically how we've enumerated files and done mirroring. Historically, you've iteratively walked the file system to get an entire list. But now, because we have a content indexer, and that's why I'm the search guide that's very approachable to code to, you can actually query and get a much faster result set, and your views will be much snappier. The next piece is the storage data source adapter, which, if you saw the file system talk this morning, is all about connecting collections of files, thumbnails, and properties and reading it into memory into one synchronous call. So instead of just pulling single items, you're able to look at a gallery in a huge set, because that's what you want, because you really care about displaying a grid. So we do a lot of thinking for you on how to make that easy. And the last is list view. List view is kind of the tip of the spear when we think about gallery experience. This is the built-in control in WinJS and the other runtimes to be able to show great Metro style with a very minimum amount of code. There's actually 2 great talks today after this about how to really take list view and make it your own. I'll cover it a little to let you know what you can do with it, but Ryan Demopoulos and Sam Spencer, 2:30, great talks to go to if you really want to know how to customize that view. So the quick primer on list view, for those of you who haven't seen a ton about it. List view is built in any gallery view you actually see in the exhibition halls or you see from me today is all built delivering list view. So the first thing you have is a data source. And I'm going to talk a lot today about the storage data source adapter. And this is the built-in WinJS control that ties to list view that enables you to naturally pull in files. The next is an item renderer, and Sam and Ryan go into this a lot. This is all about just, controlling exactly how you want to display any item in this grid. And the last part is how you define the grid layout. And we'll do some basic grid layout. But again, grid layout for masters, 2:30, go to those talks. Great talks to go to. So now we've got the obligatory architecture slide. Now that I've talked to you about the core things that make this up, here's how they all fit together. And you've probably seen something similar like this in Monop's talk as well as David Fields. The first in the tip of the spear, again, is list view. This is all about the things users see and interact with and gives you a great amount of control to control how you actually want to display data. Now, you do also have the option of doing a custom control. And I'll touch a little bit on this at the end of the slide deck. But one of the things we've found is we've actually struggled to find a great gallery experience that needs a custom control. Some of you will, and that's awesome. We built that into the platform. As you do that, you'll need to build your own custom data source adapter. And we absolutely have the support in there to do that. And Ryan and Sam will also talk about that. But for the most part, you're going to be leveraging what is the storage data source adapter. And the storage data source adapter, again, is great at working over your files and building a big bulk of loaded collections with all the information you want to display or pivot on. Now, either the storage data source adapter or the custom data source adapter leverages a file access API called File Information Factory. This is kind of the workhorse of any of these underlying systems. This is actually what allows you to bulk load that massive set of properties and thumbnails. Storage data source adapter does a great job of actually wrapping this functionality and tying it directly to list view so you get smooth scrolling and mirroring and you're able to respond to events. Underneath all this is the base file API. And this is really your bread and butter. We'll use this a ton throughout the talk. And this is all about being able to scope using queries. It's about being able to launch an item and play back or even edit an item. Now I'll talk a little bit about the Trust Broker. The Trust Broker is one of the things that actually maps what your app is capable of doing. And Jeff Johnson earlier yesterday gave a great talk on capabilities. And capabilities is all about this new way where ahead of time apps map to what sources they're allowed to access. In this case, it's usually the photos library, the music library, the documents libraries, and the pictures library. And the other piece is the file broker. I showed it a little earlier in the demo. And one of the things we think about and that we've really enabled this time is any system view that we've built that we think really pops with Metro Style, we want to make it absolutely accessible to you because it's a great place to start. And anything you see in the file picker, you can absolutely build in any of your experiences with a bare minimum of code. Now, beneath all the file access APIs are kind of the core Win32 things that you don't actually need to worry about, but will be working on your behalf. These are the file system indexer, the thumbnail cache, and the property system. And the way to think about these is these are all very smart caches that enable your content to appear very fast without directly accessing and cracking open a file. All right. So where to start? So the absolute, sorry, I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so I need my water. So there's 4 things you need to do to start. First is in capabilities. Now this is really, really easy. Most of you in a demo by now have seen the manifest editor. All you need to do for a gallery experience is say, I want access to a given gallery. We'll walk through it, but this is probably the easiest step in any demo there is. Next is the file API, and this is all about scoping to that library and creating queries. Then we've got the data source, which is all about tying thumbnails to those file items, and we'll walk through this a little bit more in depth. And lastly, list view. Again, it's all about layout. What properties do you want to display? And tying that to the data source so things scroll smoothly. So now that we've talked about those components, let's walk through the code a little. Now, if you saw Manav's introduction yesterday, he promised 4 lines of code. I actually have 5 lines and a couple slides and 1 optional. But a lot of this is about not only how do you do it, but how do you do some options that I think are super important to building an experience like this. So the first line there is, like I talked about, creating a scope to work over. And this is using the windows.storage namespace. If you're working on a gallery experience, you're going to get really familiar with windows.storage because that's where the majority of functionality is that you're going to need and want. And what I'm doing here is I'm scoping to a known folders that is the pictures library. And that covers all the folders that have been added to my pictures library and all the items that are in there, either within my app or outside my app. Now the next piece is all about, okay, now that I've got that scope, how do I want to enumerate these options? And this is an optional piece. You don't have to do this, but I put it in there because we actually have a couple of pre-baked orders that we think are the most valuable. And these are things like by name, by date, by music title, where all you really have to do is specify something like here, like order by name. You can also, and as I'll show this a little bit later, if you want to get really custom, you can create any sort that your mind can come up with. We have a huge property system, and you can pivot and sort and append on any property that is on the file system. And then the next piece is all about taking that scope and those sorts and combining it into a massive file query. And so the way I do this is by calling library create item query. And you see right there, I pass in the query options that I set above. Now, an interesting thing I'll call out, and I'll walk through a little bit more in a code demo, is there's two ways to think about this based on your gallery experience. Create item query is all about pulling in folders and files. And there's some very legitimate experiences where you want to show both folders and files. For instance, we're going to walk through a photo example where I think that's important. But there's also experiences that really just care about files. And a great example of this is music. For those of you who have music collections that date back 10, 15 years, or even starting today, one of the things you notice is the folder hierarchy is fairly useless and gets really mixed up, especially if you use multiple players. But the metadata on that's really what you want. You want to pivot by album, by artist, not by 569-832 Viper Creek, because that's not a meaningful thing to the user. And we absolutely give you that ability depending on the experience you want. Now that next piece, now that we've created our query, is all about loading that collection and tying it to thumbnails. Because the storage namespace is all about creating a query that gives me files and properties. Now, a great thing, or a core part of a gallery experience, is marrying those to thumbnails. So the first thing I always want to do when I start getting to my data source is set the options. And this is really all about thumbnails when you think about it. And I'll do a visual walkthrough a little bit in a little bit here. First is the thumbnails mode. And we have some thumbnails modes that are defined specifically per type. So as that content evolves and as your experience evolves, this is a great way to get what is the right Metro style. The next is the thumbnail size, where you see right here I've set to 192. And one of the things we've found for pictures and gallery experiences, and I'll show this in my app, 192 by 132 is what we think is a great size to make something touchable and approachable for pictures. Then the next piece is thumbnail options. I put this here for completeness sake. This is one of the things the majority of you will never need to touch. There are three core options when we think about thumbnail options. The first is to resize, which is off by default. And what that resize bit does is if you ask, we will take whatever's in the thumbnail cache and dynamically size it to whatever you exactly specify. Now, this isn't something you want to really do unless you're really sure about it, which is why it's off by default. Because what we do by default is we look at the minimum size that you requested, and then we give you one size bigger that's already cached. So it's very, very fast. And then your rendering UI layer, be it the Chakra engine or XAML, is able to actually resize that down to get a really sharp, crisp thumbnail. And they can do that much faster than we can do it at the thumbnail cache level. So that's why it's one of the things that's always off by default. The next is a scaling piece. And David Washington gave a great scaling talk yesterday. And that's all about when you go to different plateaus and different DPIs, here, we will automatically scale up the thumbnail to be the right size. And this is on by default and not something we recommend touching. But again, you have the power. You can play with the defaults. If they're not right for you, you can absolutely tailor your experience. So the last option, again, is an option that's off by default because we think that's the right thing, is to only pull thumbnails from the thumbnail cache. Now, if you were absolutely most concerned with speed, that is an option that you want to set because what it'll do is it will only return items that are cached, so it's very, very fast. Now, in general, we don't think that's what people want. We think people want thumbnails for everything and their display. And that's a great mix on what we see with list view and the storage data source adapter because no matter what, you're going to get this big, beautiful gallery display. However, if you went down the custom control bit, this is something that I could see you using because you would have some very custom logic to do a fast paint and then do a secondary paint, which there's a lot of apps out there that do today, but we actually think we're very fast with the defaults between the storage adapter and the list view. The last piece is whether or not it's synchronous. Now, we've talked a lot about user experience at this conference, and we're going to keep talking about it. And one of the things we've built into the storage data source and list view is the notion of thumbnails, rendering, and reading view. Now, this is something that has taken us a while to get at Microsoft and is absolutely the right experience. If you go on any previous version of the OS and open something like Windows Explorer, open a massive thing of pictures or music, one of the things you start to notice is that thumbnails just randomly appear in. We fixed that. We fixed that for your apps. We fixed that for the Metro style experience, where what we'll do is we'll actually do the right calculations to read all the thumbnails in what your sort view is. And this makes it a much more natural, intuitive experience, and you just feel like the app is working like it's supposed to. And that's why setting synchronous to false, which is the default, does that. What turning it on does is means we won't paint anything until the screen is completely full. Again, you can use this option. We think the default is really the right default, but it's going to be governed by your experience. So now that we've done that, just like with the file query, where we defined our options and then we created it, we've now got our options for the data source. We're going to go ahead and call the WinJS UI storage data source adapter and marry the file query, which has all our items and properties, to the thumbnails that we want to. And this gets us a fully loaded collection. This is the thing that allows us to smoothly pan through because we've read all that into memory and we're treating your entire collection as a single entity. Now the last piece is rendering this into list view. We've created our query, we've primed the data source, and now all we have to do is tie that list view control to the data source. Very, very easy to do. There's tons of sample code on this. There's actually the code demo I'm going to walk you through is 99% there up on Dev Center, and I'll give you pointers to that at the end of the talk. So now that we've walked through that, I've already done a little bit of talking about thumbnails. I want to spend even more time because, again, user experience, that we really want your media to pop for the medium. So we've broken this down and made it very approachable. One of the interesting things is the thumbnail cache historically that we have in Windows is super, super powerful. But man, you really need to know what you're doing to use it and make it great for you. And we kind of flipped that on its head with this release and said, let's make it great for the media types, make it in a line or two of code, and so you just get the right thing by default. So two thumbnail modes that are very similar, not surprisingly, is Pictures View and Videos View. And this is all about rendering thumbnails for pictures and rendering thumbnails for videos. Now, again, optimized per content type. One of the first questions people ask when they see this is why have two? Well, one of the things is we're planning for the long term. Video and photos could take different directions over time. So one of the things we want to do, if your app is optimized for one, we want to continue giving that optimal experience release after release. So we want you to say, I'm all about videos, I'm all about pictures. Now there is one key difference between videos and pictures, and you can actually see it up on the slide here. That first picture to the left is a picture, and the one to the right is videos. And what that has is a small adornment. One of the things that's pretty common in the media space with photos and videos is apps that work over both of them. So one of the things we do is make it really easy to distinguish what's a photo, and what's a video. And that's what that adornment does. So if you have a massive display of both photos and videos, which if you have a camera phone, if you have an SLR, if you have a point and shoot, you probably have these in your photo library today. You've got a very tailored, beautiful way that shows up great in your experience to distinguish one between the other. Now, the other piece I'll call out is what we call 0.7 cropped. And this is all about what we found is a great height to width ratio for displaying Metro style. If you look at media experiences in the past, be it photos libraries and videos libraries, one of the things almost everybody does, because everyone has this, is portrait style photos and landscape style photos. And when you do a scroll across those, visually it feels very heterogeneous. And you look at it and it's just not as smooth and as tailored as you want it. And like you saw in Jensen's talk, it's all about making your media pop and making bold statements with typography and grouping. So what this does is actually crops everything to look the same. And the way we do that is for 16:9 photos, you see there on the first blue slide on the right, We crop the edges, so everything is a perfect 0.7 height to width ratio. And for portrait and thumbnails, we actually have worked a ton with Microsoft Research and all the teams at Microsoft that work on photos to figure out the optimum way to crop a thumbnail so that a portrait thumbnail shows people's faces. Because we tend to find one of the most important and most key elements in pictures tends to be people's faces. And this is a great average where what we do is we take the space vertically and we divide it into thirds, where we crop the first third off, and then the bottom 2/3 of the image is cropped. And we find this is a great mix to hit the focal point for whatever is in a portrait space. And from there, that gets me one contiguous homogeneous set to scroll through and look beautiful. The next two thumbnail modes to talk about are music and documents. And these are more traditional thumbnail types. And again, like they're very similar now, but we create different types, so it makes it very easy, if these types evolve with time, for your views to evolve with them well. They're really optimized for square layouts. 99% of all album art for music is square. There are a few exceptions when you get into things like special box sets and things like that, but the majority are square, so this is the great place to start. With files, we've thought about files a little differently this time, where we actually take what is a file icon, be it a Word document, a PowerPoint document, or something like that, and we actually keep the icon in an ideal size, and we put a color plate behind it that matches the system personality. You can see this in the file picker. You can see this in the file search portion on the start view. It gives you a great way of making all these similar. Now, you see the next two are that photo and that video that I presented. And they're not really an ideal layout for here, but you could do this. And that's where actually that list view piece comes in that I don't have bolded. We have music view for being all about music, documents view for being all about documents. List view is if you're one of those rare apps that covers documents, music, and pictures. And this is basically says, I want to show everything. And this is actually what our file search experience does in the Metro style. And you can take a look at that, and I'll demo it a little later. But what we do, since this is square cropped, is we basically start in the center for any thumbnail cache size that we have, and we start from the center and go out an equal height and width distance. Now there's a set of you that say, you'll see some of this, and you don't exactly want to do what that is. So we also provide the originals, and that's what's all about single item view. And what this will give you is any aspect ratio that the original medium is in, whether it's 16 by 9, 16 by 10, some really strange photo format or album art format, will give you exactly what it is, and you can decide to scale it to your experience. Again, like we have great defaults for media, and if you want to go beyond that, we provide a really easy way for you to tailor your experience. So now that we've kind of talked about all the building blocks, be it the file API, using the data source adapter, let's talk about the most common way to build gallery experiences. And that's all about tying list view and the storage data source adapter together. Now, from a code perspective, this is awesome, because you're really up and running with a pretty solid experience in about 5 lines of code. It's all about smart defaults to get you what we think is a very system-like experience. Because in the past, one of the things we've seen is we have these great, really powerful views in the system, and developers want them, and it's not super approachable to get there. That all changes with Win 8. Very, very approachable, very easy to make your stuff look like the system and even go beyond that. Now, when we look at this system of using list view and the storage data source adapter, if we go back to those 5 core features and map them to what this is, from the view perspective, all we really have to do is define the layout and queries. From a content perspective, let's figure out the thumbnail mode and properties. And I'll show a lot about how having knowledge of the property system and what properties are over content can make your views super powerful. Now, fast scrolling and mirroring, this is kind of the I give you free stuff. You can look under your chair. No code required. This is all handled for you. And historically, this has been the absolute hardest part of making a great gallery experience. And search, very little to do. Priya gave a great talk about it. I'll show some demo code here. But but you should really go watch Priya's talk if you want to really get into the nuts and bolts of making search great. All right. Now let me switch over to my demo machine. Okay, we are up and running. So the first thing I want to do is go to my start view. And I've actually got this really simple sample app that I created called Gallery Grid. So I click on Gallery Grid. And boom, what's the first thing you saw there? So in a quick response, we painted all the thumbnails in reading order. This gets super important as you're consuming lots of information, is it just feels natural with a swipe or with a scroll, especially when you're in the reading order of going top to bottom, left to right. Now, one of the things you'll notice, bare minimum of code, I'm scrolling, and again, that reading mode of, oh, thumbnails are just popping in the way I see them. This is beautiful, this is interactive. I can scroll back and forth. Like, this is a super performant, great view. I need some more water. Now, there are a couple other pieces about gallery views that have historically been very important. When you think about a gallery experience, almost every user in the world has some app that's a gallery experience, or has apps that work on gallery type data, be it music or pictures. So one of the things that apps have always had to do is that mirroring part of figuring out, hey, if something changes, if something updates, I need to figure out how to do that. And that's been, if you look at Windows Media Player, that was about 10,000 lines of code to do that really right. In Metro Style, it's about 2. So here we go. I've got my great gallery view over my pictures library. Now I'm just going to go ahead and launch Windows Explorer, something that's near and dear to my heart. Go into my pictures library. Now, one thing we'll notice, I don't know about you, but I work over my pictures library with my wife and I, and one of the things we have a lot is we end up with dupe pictures. And if you look here, 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 clearly we've downloaded the same photos twice. And I'm someone who's absolutely neurotic about my photo library. That's just one of the things, and I actually will have a few demo pieces about that. But I really want to get rid of that. So I go into Windows Explorer. Those look like the Antarctica pictures. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete those, because I know they're already there. And this could be Windows Explorer. It could be any other app. So deleted. There you go. Did you see that? They're all gone. Just in a simple, smooth animation, they updated. I can even go right back. Let's restore them. And there you go. Even before I have time to switch, I can't actually project the monitor where you can see both at the same time, but the view updates almost instantaneously to any type change. I can even go as far, and that's not just for file actions like delete and rename. Let's go in here. I've got this beautiful picture of a seal. I'll go ahead and open it up with Paint. He looks kind of sleepy. Let's go ahead and do that. I am sleepy. I think a lot of people are sleepy after today. Let's go ahead and make it a little bigger. Let's make sure I can type. I go ahead and save it. Let's go back to my Gallery Grid app. There you go, look at that. Even the thumbnail is updated to have that. Everything that is an action on the file system will be instantaneously reflected in your gallery with no code. This just makes it super, super powerful. Now, one of the things that Priya showed in the earlier demo about search is how the content indexer really takes search to the next level. When you look at gallery experiences previous to Windows 8, doing content search was really, really hard because you basically have to have an entire team dedicated to building databases and understanding things like language, word breaking, reasoning over files. The good news is all of you have that team. They work in Redmond. 3 or 4 of them are sitting right there. We took this for you. So here, I'm just going to go to my search experience, and you see I've enabled the search contract. So my Gallery Grid app shows up there. And I'm going to go ahead and type NA. You have to have some level of demo gremlins. So one of the things that actually did is did a search, and it actually appended to what my base query was of all items and said, give me only things that hit nature. All right. And I've got a core part of that where I was going to show you local suggestions. One of the most powerful parts of using the local system to do content suggestion for local files is that we'll reason about any metadata on the file. One of the things I was going to show there is a lot of the tags I've done on the pictures. But I seem to be having a little issue. So trust me, I can show you at the exhibit hall when I'm sure it'll be working. So that's all great. I've done that. Believe me now. We've got these great, powerful views. Now let's actually start walking through some code. I'm going to go ahead and kill my app. This is one of the things I think you all will start to become very familiar with as you're constantly working on updated versions, is running your app, killing it, repackaging it. So now let's open Visual Studio. I've got my gallery grid sample here. Okay, now what I just showed you, just show there's no tricks up my sleeve. It was a bare minimum of code in 4 files. It was a default CSS file, a default JS file, a default HTML file, and the manifest. Really nothing to building that experience you just saw, of making it performant, making it listening to notifications, and making it visually pop. So the first thing, like I said, is we need to look at our capabilities. And sorry, it's actually hard to, it looks like the capabilities are a little bigger in the manifest file. Now this is an interesting app in that I'm having it work over every possible library because we're going to look at all the different gallery type experiences. But you see here, I've turned on the document library access, the music library access, the pictures library, and the video library. Now, for pictures, music, and videos, that's all I need to do. I am done with the manifest editor. I can go ahead and call it a day. Documents is a little bit special in that when we look at documents, we actually define the file types that we work over. There was a great talk by Jeff Johnson about the capabilities model. And one of the core reasons we do this is if you've looked at your My Documents lately, it tends to be a dumping ground for any kind of thing. So we want to make an extra step to say, you explicitly work over these type of files. But after I've done this, I've defined my capabilities, I've set some declarations in the case where I'm working over documents, I'm done. I never really need to go back to the manifest file. Now, I talked about 3 other files. I think a core question is, well, each one of those can have 10,000 lines of code in it. They really, really don't. If I look at first my default.html file, I'll go through here, and I just created a base project using Visual Studio. I load in the entire set of WinJS libraries. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm defining folder templates. And if you remember back to list view, one of the things you need is an item render. And what that item render is going to do is take these templates for a given content type and create it in the view. So I've defined a photo and folder template that really is an image and a folder title. I've defined a music template that is all about making music pop. It shows that thumbnail, shows some properties like album and artist, but very, very trivial code. And when you look at it, when you go up on Dev Center later this week, all these templates are actually up on Dev Center. And I defined another music template as well as a file template. And these are all about just defining file templates that are core to the type of content you're displaying. Now we get to the long piece of code. No, not really. We get to creating a list view. And list view, again, super powerful and is one of the best things to use for a gallery experience. So you see here, I've got a div called content. This is where I'm going to load everything up. I've named it Great Gallery Experience. And essentially, my list control is called data list. And the first thing I want to do is do the data-win control and create a list view instance. And I define a few things about the options. I want a grid layout. I want to do multi-select. All very, very easy things. And again, Talks 230 today are going to show you really how to make list view just rock to any scenario you want. Now, in my CSS, again, almost nothing there. Our CSS will also be up on Dev Center to be able to look at what are some ideal templates for grids and gallery experiences. All I'm really doing is defining an ideal width and height and how I actually want the text to show up for a given item. This is very, very easy. And typically, when you're in an HTML5 app, you want to be defining your item size and layout either in the HTML or directly in CSS. Now, from that standpoint, these two apps, or the HTML file and the CSS file, that's about all I need to do in those. The real magic is always in the JavaScript file. And I'll walk through this, and then we'll start packaging up the app and playing with it a little bit. So first and foremost is the activation code. All this is about is, hey, launch my app, bind to a list view, and paint some stuff. Not much to this. When you create any default app with a list view, it'll do this. I did a little extra work here to support search activation, but I'm not going to cover it a lot. Now when we get into the core of the functionality that really makes this app great, I've got this function called load data list into view control. And that's exactly what it is. And if you look at the code, it is conspicuously exactly like the code slide I showed you. All I need to do is define a scope over a library, which is my library variable. Then I want to go ahead and I'm setting the options for how I want to sort this. I've set sort by name because I think that's a very valuable sort when you're dealing with pictures, especially with files and folders. Now, I added one other piece here, because again, we're working on with queries. When a user does actually submit a query, I actually just tag that on to my query options, which you see right here. So if it exists, just append that, and we'll use that as a filter over the entire set. Now, the next piece, now that I've done that, I've got my scope, I've got my options, just like in the slide. I create a file query that's all about giving me all the items over this scope with those given constraints. Now from there, also, exactly like I showed you in the code slide, nothing special about this, is setting the data source options. Now we're going to start with pictures, where we're going to define the thumbnails mode, which is going to be pictures view, a thumbnail size, which is 192, which that'll give me the minimum width that I want, which is an ideal for displaying photos in a grid. And then the thumbnail options, which, like we talked about, there's no real reason to change these for the most common cases. And I'll set synchronous to false. Now that I've set up those options, and you'll notice a reoccurring pattern here. Define your scope, set your options, and then initialize, be it a view or a query or a data source. Here, I go ahead and I call the WinJS UI storage.dataSource, pass in my base query and my data source options, and this is the piece that's marrying those thumbnails to the query of files and properties. And then I go ahead and I'll go ahead and bind each element to that data list that I created here. And from there, the last core step is my item render. And this is a core part of list view where I take all that and I'll render each individual item. And if you remember those templates that we defined earlier, here I'm calling that template. And we're going to start with photos and saying, hey, go ahead and load this. And from there, the last piece is just lining up the CSS class. So I'm going to go ahead and build this. Let me just make sure it's not running. We're good to go. So I went ahead and built it, and one of the things you'll notice off the bat is I actually got a different view. One of the things that's different is my folders and my pictures are all interspliced together. Now this isn't really something that I wanted. One of the things I want to go through and do is fix this. Now, the reason it's this way is because I need an extra query option to set on my view. So I'm going to go ahead and here. I'll stop that. Now I'm going to go up to where I was creating my query, which is right here, because you see, this makes sense now. I was just ordering everything by name. I want to go ahead and do set an extra sort option. And I'm going to go ahead and set an array. And this is where it comes in handy to start looking at properties that are worthwhile to pivot over. And one thing I want to pivot over is whether something is a folder. And I want to put all those in front. And now I'll go ahead and I'll take my query options, and I'm going to go ahead and add a sort option. And I'll add the sort option. Now let's see what we've got. Now in theory, if I wrote code on the fly right, we have a hanging donut. So what that probably means is I have a typo somewhere. So let's see. Let's try this again. And there you go. Now with just a simple change in query option, and you saw that reading view paint, I put all the folders first. Now this is great. I've got this rich, beautiful photos view. Let's look at what it takes to actually change this from a photos view to a music view. I'm going to go ahead and stop my debugger. And if you remember, where do we start from? We start from defining our library. So I'm going to go here. And I'm going to set a music library. Now, one of the things that I'm talking about music, I'm going to go ahead and say, ordering by name isn't necessarily that interesting, but ordering by music info is very interesting, because that's going to give me a sort by songs. And now, one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier is this create item query. One of the things I don't want with my music library is showing folders, because really, when it gets down to music, albums are folders, not the thing that is 57832-Viper Creek, because that's the way I bought it. So I'm going to change this to be a file item. So the thing I'm doing there is my file query is only going to show, or my query is only going to show files, not files and folders. Now if we go back to our data source options, here's another place where we want to set our music view. I'm going to play around, and I'm going to set it to 130. And I'm not touching anything else, but I'm going to load, like we saw in the HTML, I'm going to load the appropriate template into my item renderer. And make sure I am using the correct CSS. All right. So that was 4 edits. And what do you know? We actually have a music view. Again, we're doing square thumbnails. We're popping out the album art, the artist. In just 4 lines of code, I changed a photo gallery to a music gallery. Now, even looking at this isn't necessarily the most ideal way to show music. Even though we've talked about grids, there's other ways that a gallery experience can pop. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And I created another layout. And again, all this is about controlling your layout. And then I'm going to go ahead up here, do 2 changes. Whoops. And now I've got something that really shows those thumbnail thumbnails well. And this is using the Win.js list view. It's not just for grids. You can see I can move through. I see the album art. I even go here. Now, one thing I do see is I've got an entire album here because I've got multiple items. Well, fast forward a couple days, and I promised I'd also do this because there were some demo gremlins in a previous. This is Maestro, an app created in the, by Manav Mishra that basically took what I did and spent a day hacking with it. And you've got that rich grid. And if I go into Viper Creek, again, using all queries in the Windows.storage, here we go. I'm listing all the files that are in the album, all using the property system in queries to start rocking out and building a great music player. For the real first time in Windows history, you can build a great music player and a great gallery experience in about an hour or two of time. That is just amazing and makes it so approachable that you can really concentrate on making your apps pop. Now, the last piece that I'm going to show, we've done music, we've done pictures. That's great. Now let's look at actually creating a documents view and tailoring to what is a documents view. So again, the beauty of this, and I'll say it again and again, just a couple lines of code to make a great gallery experience. I don't care what content that you're trying to display. So the first thing, if we're going to display documents, I want to go ahead and map to the documents library. Now, I think one of the most interesting ways to view documents is order by date. So this will actually show docs in the order of things that were edited last. And again, nothing changes because I'm only caring about files, so I'm going to keep my query here that's all about file items. Now when we get back into my data source option, again, we want the right thumbnail to show up for this experience and the right layout. So I'm going to go ahead and define this as documents view. And I'm going to have a slightly different layout for documents because one of the things that's really important is getting property information about titles and names and size. And then if I come down to the last piece, the template, I'll go ahead and just define the file template. And then here, I want to make sure I'm mapping to the right CSS. File. So let's give it a whirl. And now one of the things you see is actually I built a file view. And if you look at this, this is amazingly similar. And there, now I'm finally getting my local type ahead of working over Meta. If I type auction, it's almost the exact same layout. Again, any system view you see, be it in the file search experience, be it in the picker, you can build it with a bare minimum of code, and you can even go beyond it. So let's go back to my experience. Now, one of the things I notice here is I'm showing the name of the app, and I'm also showing Microsoft PowerPoint presentation here. I'm not sure if you all can actually see that, but it's actually the type of file it is. One of the things is the thumbnail's already showing that to me. So I want to go ahead and say, actually, I want to display some different metadata. And here I can go into my default HTML. Let's go ahead and look at a specific item. Here I've got the file template. And this makes sense. I'm showing the file name. That's all good. The display type seems a little redundant, and the path seems like a good thing. So I'm going to go ahead, instead of display type, I'm going to do document properties. Actually, I think it's lowercase. And what this is going to do is load in that property into my view instead of what was there previously. And you always have to have some part of the demo that goes a little more slowly. All right, you know what? I think you're just going to have to take my word for it. I'll show you in the demo booth in about a half hour, but absolutely works. So that's really, when we look at building gallery experience, it's that easy. It's that approachable. And we've got samples up on Dev Center to where you can do what I did in 20 minutes, an hour, and you can start playing and tweaking your experience. So now I'm going to go back to the deck, now that we've gone through building a great gallery experience, using ListView, using the storage data source adapter. When we look at the recap of everything that's great about this, about 5 lines of code when you look at the core things to attach, going from what is a file all the way up to displaying a beautiful experience. Next, it really enables all the core features of a gallery experience. It does views, it does content, it does mirroring, it does fast scrolling, it even supports search. And we've really done a lot to support all the built-in content types that are important to the most common experiences. Now, there is one other type which I'm going to talk about little, and this is all about using a custom control and a custom data source. You can absolutely do this. It's built into the platform to support it. This is something that will give you more control, but introduces a lot more complexity. And as of yet, we haven't had a media gallery type experience that has needed this, but you all are really smart people. There's probably going to be one out there. You absolutely have the ability to do it. Now, what you're going to need to do, if you do that, is a couple extra steps beyond what we've already said. One, you're going to need to build the logic in your view control to tie to whatever your data source is. And that's that part about really enabling that virtualization and fast scrolling, so you don't blit 10,000 things into memory and basically put your app to a halt. You really want to look at a couple of views or pages worth of items and then read that out of memory and then read in whatever the user is looking at. The next is the data source, which is very tied to the view control. And this is all about bulk loading and unloading through queries. So you're actually getting all the right items that you need to. And the last piece is eventing. That piece I showed you earlier in the demo where I deleted files or I changed files, or say I had a metadata service that updated my album art. That is something that you're going to need to use through queries to say, hey, an event has happened on the file system. Give me what has changed. I need to reflect that in my view. Now, if we look holistically, there's 3 big things I want you to take away from this talk. First, gallery experiences are easy to create, easier than they've ever been. We're really talking a couple lines of code. When you go after it, ListView and the storage data source adapter always is going to address the most common needs that you have. You can always go the custom view route, and it will work. If you're going to go this route, and when you're playing around with your gallery experience, one of the things I recommend you do is going into the Win.js library and looking at how the storage data source and the list view is built. That's a great place to start from. Now, there's a bunch of really solid related sessions. Some have already happened, and some are about to go on. First, that's already happened is the Jeff Johnson talk on capabilities, as well as Manav Misra's talk on seamlessly interacting with web and local data. But there's a couple coming in 2:30 that are all about building Metro-style apps with controls, as well as polished HTML5. I'll actually put these out on a tweet later if you want to get to them. Further reading and documentation, again, very, very easy. We've got a sample using the storage data source adapter up there. I modified it probably less than 3% to walk you through how to make a really powerful experience. We've got a bunch of great documentation on list view and search, and building great Metro-style apps. My name is Ed Averett. Thank you for your time. Hopefully this was really helpful for you guys. There's going to be a number of us heading down to the booths. You can send session feedback to the URL below. And that's pretty much everything you need to know about gallery experiences for Windows 8 Metro-style apps. Thank you.